اللهم لولا أنت ما اهتدينا ولا تصدقنا ولا صلينا اللهم لولا أنت ما اهتدينا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. We are back with another live. Inshallah, we'll be discussing a couple of videos and how to react to it. However, we're gonna be waiting for people to come up and discuss how they see and believe that God can be proven from New Testament only. So we're gonna be open to receiving someone to talk about this. And yeah, I think there was a viral video of Brother Muslim Lantern and God Logic from Sunday, not Sunday, Monday maybe. Just give me a second. Let me put up the title to the stage. Just a second. Yeah, there have been a lot of clips from Cliff where he's been talking about weird stuff all the time. And, it is what it is, man. It is what it is. I think wanted to talk about give me a second. Just a second. Let me try finding that video. Also wanted to share a few of the comments. I think I have them here. If not, stuff like this, people getting triggered. Where I talked about someone said that $5 billion, this and that, and I was like, well, yet they cannot spare a single dime on baby formula, so to speak. And this is the guy who got triggered that said that a lot of people got triggered, got very weird replies. None of that made any sense. However, there's a simple thing. Jesus said it's very difficult for a rich man to enter paradise. It'd be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than this. So it's like, oh, you didn't ask for it, but sure, one of them is the drawing that exists of him being crucified and his grave in the Holy Land. So what this basically talks about is I asked the person if there's any evidence that Jesus was ever buried. And this is what he replied. No sense. If there's a drawing of someone from somewhere getting crucified, first of all, it can be a live drawing. It can be done when it was done. So whenever it was made, it could be made by anyone 100 years after, 75 years after. That's how stories are made up. So, you need to have something authentic. Who made that drawing? What was it? yeah, I do believe, and I can grant that, if you find people deifying a Christ in the early second century, or even at the middle of second century, you can find those drawings. But that still does not mean that Jesus claimed a divinity, and now all of a sudden Jesus is God. Those all of those things are already granted in Christianity. That's why they believe in what they believe. But the things when they come up with consubstantiality, co-equal, co-eternal, stuff like that, that is nowhere to be found in the Bible or any archaeological evidence, so to speak, from the time of Jesus, not hundreds of years later or decades later. I think another triggered comment was by finding it. That's a lot of pictures, man. So this one I claim that Mormons actually have more witnesses to their story, quote unquote, than the New Testament, which I implied for canonical gospels. And then this person showed up. I think we talked about this yesterday in the stream, that Gospel of John was the last and the least, uh, you know, uh, in terms of its message with the synoptics, and it was considered Gnostic as per one scholar up until 130 Common Era, and after that it was considered Orthodoxy. So and a lot of things been going around when it comes to what Christians believe to be Orthodoxy and what Christians believe to be not Orthodoxy. So that's another can of worms. Athanasius put a lot of church fathers under the bus when he said that whoever believes that Jesus was a created being, or anything close to that, then that would be enough for us to say that that's heretical. So it's a matter of opinion when it talks about these things. And I think I have one more before we proceed to something which is not a rhetoric and something of substance. This one too. So this one basically I was asking them, it said three gods, otherwise polytheism would be impossible. And someone said three persons, one essence is what he meant to say, but he said three persons, one God. And then I was like, are the three persons carrying same essence or different essences? So three. And then he said, no, three persons share one divine essence. Stop acting stupid. And I said, when you share, sharing is between more than one people. And since then, I haven't heard from him. It's a guy with running a page with 200,000 followers or something like that. But that's what happened. It all crumbles when press just a little harder than they expect. Mhm. Let me try finding the video. It's a video of the Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic, and I think there was a video I wanted to discuss of Rabbi Tovia Singer about Daniel 9. by finding it, and we'll discuss it. Let's do this first. What was it? Let's do this one.
Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, you know, this guy says the roof was thatched, but another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed. Contradiction. Yep. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. The Old
Testament.
Yes.
Okay.
It's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history, but has mythological undertones. I think that the military conquests I mentioned in my opening statements are attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that the Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so there are lots of different genres here. The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever. Maybe you can send me an email about it later or something. That's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these, and in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that...
Well, that definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction because, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other. Sure. It's not as if Thucydides is... So he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus's life, and they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean. Pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without being anything miraculous?
This is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible, and we've all read the Bible in a way, I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone would, what's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women was disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark and I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they're the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, you know. So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually.
This is a prime example of when someone's just speaking to speak and they're basically gibbering and they have no idea what they're talking about, at least slightest of it, right? Even if you're wrong about something, you need to have a theory where you have, you're going to be in a debate and you're going to be pressed by someone. At least have these things in order and sorted out so you don't make a fool of yourself when you're talking about these things like this. What I meant by that is that, he's saying that the Gospels were written in a very close proximity to the events when that happened. Now, my question is, and it becomes that, what dating are you giving that? And when just the last point, there are so many mistakes in it. Just the last one, women were the ones who used to go and spice the bodies. So obviously, women are the one who are going to go and spice up the body, put spices on the body, not men. That would have been wrong. So what's written is absolutely right in that sense. It's not that, if you're trying to create a criteria of embarrassment or, that doesn't work here. I'm talking about the historical critical methods.
Actually, the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that, if I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as
well. I'm not. No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument.
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts if they are historical texts. The thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the event. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus's empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you've said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this is this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay, so let's put together what I just said and you just said, and let's ask the question: based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings, but I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from revelation.
That's fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right, I can't contest that because that's outside the domain of reason. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy. And because we got 4 accounts, I'm going to...
hold on, you're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that
I did.
Women discovering
and
the
I'm
tomb.
saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that would be something you wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree that in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know, but I'm happy to grant it. Yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know, even though Josephus says it. Okay,
well, that's in a court of law, right?
No, but what I'm saying is, if you're applying the is it impossible for us to know, I would suggest to you it is impossible for us to know that it was the absolute and unwavering duty of women to provide all the ointments. You've stated that as a fact.
No,
I would say it's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that if somebody's reading this text and you say, well, if this were invented, why would it be women who discover the tomb? That would be embarrassing for them, the so-called embarrassment criterion. I'm saying, would it not be just, is not the fact that we're told why they're going to the tomb to anoint the body, is this not just reason enough?
No.
I mean, look, I'm not the one claiming I know how this went down, by the way. And also, you just accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
Well, what I'm saying is that you have an event. Mm-hmm. These events are described with great precision mm-hmm. and a sort of eyewitness presence there. Now, we know in some cases there weren't eyewitnesses, but they're nevertheless described, this is the way it happened. And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah, none of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
No, you're not hearing from the women. I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry.
I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed, that would completely undermine Christianity.
Are you saying important.
That? No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Of course I'm not saying
Let me ask you a different question.
I'm saying that historically it matters. The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And so when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
First of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus's crucifixion? Unknown.
Allegedly
disputed. There are a couple of potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. Mm-hmm. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
No, it would not.
No.
It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have 2 guys. And they would get that, and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34 years old.
Right, but that's a different kind. Because if you could tell me that the reason why they had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point, I wouldn't say that that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false.
No, but I'm saying
firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story that the Bible tells is true. It means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up, and that I could engage in exactly, let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3 is 33. Hold on. And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy said 34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying this is basically Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's why it happened. They say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of, of Hosea.
Okay, and so
in other words,
and just to tell you where they quote the family went to the Egypt stuff, let's go to Hosea 11, and you'll find out why that does not work. And the reason for that is that the gospel writer just picked up the first verse, forgot about the other ones. And so this is Hosea 11, and this is what they're talking about. That Matthew forcefully sent Jesus there and said that, out of Egypt I called my son. But that son cannot be Jesus, because if it is, then that son used to be an idol worshiper. It states here, but the more they were called, the more they went away from me, they sacrificed to the Baals and they burned incense to the images. See the problem there? So, it doesn't work like that. Things about to end.
If the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual text, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction. And in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
Actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, see it. Come on.
It wouldn't. I'll tell you why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
contradicting each other.
No, not contradicting each other. If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one's ever heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So which event? This prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a plethora of contradictions, you wouldn't be spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one in the audience has heard of either.
Hold on.
But okay, you've heard of it. Probably because you've been listening to his YouTube channel.
You don't think that this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospels, the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to Egypt. Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the Gospel. I'm not saying.
Dinesh, also, you said, why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion, whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it happens afterwards. We can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial, and then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, oh, well, I haven't even heard of it, and no one else really cares about this, when other people do, by the way. This is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospel. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is, when I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction. I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead, it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single contradiction in these texts.
I am saying that the texts are written from 4 different points of view.
But do they contradict each other?
And it is quite possible that on details, Matthew tells you things that are not in Mark, or different than Mark. Contradict Mark. Yes, contradict Mark. And so the point is, here's my point. You're acting... look at it this way. You would be scoring a point if you could say, God wrote 4 books and they contradict each other. Just like if you're able to say, Dinesh said this in the beginning of the debate and that at the end of the debate, Dinesh is contradicting himself. On the other hand, if we have 2 guys who are here today to go and write an account of this debate, right? And then we look at their accounts, which are authentic, first person. I was their accounts with a lot of detail.
Yep.
And one guy says, for example, the lights were dark. The other guy says the lights were dim. Or one guy says, for example, that Dinesh was sitting at a 45-degree angle. Another guy says it was a 50-degree angle.
Yeah. But
These are
now,
not.
now imagine,
and then
now
someone goes, Dinesh was sitting at a 43.5-degree angle because he thought this was a way of maximizing his rhetorical effectiveness for the audience. People would be like,
now imagine somebody said, Alex was wearing a blue jacket, and the reason he was wearing a blue jacket, someone said it's a blue jacket, someone else said it's a red jacket. Who cares? You're quite right. But if somebody said specifically, I know that the reason he was wearing a blue jacket was because there's an upcoming election in the UK that's just been announced, and he was trying to represent the Conservative Party. And somebody else said, I know that the reason he was wearing red, and in fact, he told us himself that the reason he was wearing red is because he wanted to support Labour in the upcoming general election in his home country.
Okay, perfect
You would
example.
say, that is a contradiction and means that one of you wasn't paying close enough attention, not just to the color of my jacket, but the very message that I was trying to get across.
That could well be true. But what I'm getting at is we know.
So I think that was pretty bad for Christianity once again, and probably gonna end this stream now, inshallah. Take good care of yourself. Nobody tried to show up and defend Christianity, the God of New Testament. And we'll pick it up later, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما